Welcome to the FemiNinja Project. I am your host, Cheryl Ilove, middle-aged ninja hiding in plain sight, dedicated to restoring human dignity one person at a time and helping you unleash your personal power. Discover that it's possible to look like a woman, act like a lady, move like a ninja, and think like a warrior. And remember, men are always welcome on the FemiNinja Project. I am so happy and honored to introduce a very special guest to you today. She is an award-winning author, and she'll tell us all about it, and just a great humanitarian. Her name is Bonnie McCune. So welcome, Bonnie. Welcome to the show.
Well, it's great to be here.
I am so happy to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
That's good.
The end of one year, the beginning of another, so you start lining up, what did I accomplish and what do I want to do next year?
Well, that's a great place to start. So what have you accomplished?
Well, I had a novel come out in March, which was my fifth book of fiction, my third novel. That was big. And then we also did a little local traveling to Leadville and to Rocky Mountain National Park.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, that was fun. I also took my first cruise in April. I had never been on one.
Wow. So where did you go?
The Caribbean. And it was fun because actually one place we were supposed to stop, we couldn't stop because another cruise ship had run into the dock and we couldn't go there.
Oh, jeez.
So that was exciting.
That's very exciting. Yeah, I've only gone on one cruise in my life, and I was 25 at the time, so that was quite a long time ago. And I met my mom, my parents, my mother and dad, and my two younger sisters in Florida, in Miami, I think. And we took off from there and did a Caribbean cruise for like the week of Thanksgiving. And that was wonderful because I got to visit part of my family, and we had a very nice vacation and celebrate Thanksgiving all at the same time. So that was really good. And it was really fun, but I think I'm more of a mountain girl. I couldn't wait to get off that ship. I was feeling a little confined.
I agree with you. I looked around and this was a huge ship. It had 4,500 passengers and I thought, 4,500 people don't have anything better to do than to sail along on the ocean for a week. I was like, I gotta get busy.
And you are a very busy person. And that's one of the things that just really kind of caught my eye when I officially met you. I formally met you, when was that? The beginning of December.
Right.
And that was in Georgetown at the Georgetown Book Nook. So it was at the Christmas market, and we had a little space. Well, it wasn't a little space. We were in the Heritage
Center?
Yeah, Historical Center or something. Yeah, so I immediately, you were sitting pretty close to me, and I just immediately was attracted to you for some reason. There was something about your energy and about your, I don't know, your whole spirit, which is something that I really key into, being a ninja. And it just really appealed to me. And then you came over to me and started talking a little bit more, and I just found your story very fascinating. Just the fact, of course, that you are a very successful author and writer, at least as far as I'm concerned, you are. And I know that you did have that, your most recent novel come out in March, and I saw you've got some fantastic reviews for it, professional reviews. So congratulations. That's
Thank you.
Wonderful. And then I started to learn a little bit more about you, and I found out that you began writing at a very young age. Is that right?
Yes, I have known I was going to be a writer from the age of 10.
Wow.
And have never swerved.
So did you write anything at the age of 10?
Yes, actually, I wrote a poem and sent it into the Saturday Evening Post, and they rejected it, of course. And ever since then, I have written and been rejected, written and been rejected, written and been rejected.
Jeez. So how do you deal with rejection? And I think that's something that's really important for all of us to hear, because we all are rejected in life, many times, whether it's in our business, our, creative sense, relationships, whatever. So how do you deal with that rejection?
I take it just as part of the journey. And someone said, I don't remember who, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And that's quite true. And especially for me, it's especially true with writing because I get so much back from it. Even if I don't publish with a huge publisher or sell thousands and thousands of volumes, I learn so much from the process of writing. And I know when I was in high school and college, I kept a journal, and it was just like spewing out on paper. I remember one entry I wrote, "The world is the color of vomit to me." You know, that was in my young angst period.
I would think so. Yeah, that kind of sounds like there was something going on there.
Who knows? I felt very deep. But, you know, that's one of the things that any art form, but for me especially writing, allows you to think about things, take them out, study them, turn them around, decide what you think about them, and then continue with them. But if you're a visual artist, or if you're a musician, or if you're a quilter, whatever you do that uses that part of your brain that's creative, helps you learn about yourself and the world around you.
Amen to that. That's very, very true. I was just thinking about what you were saying, and I used to knit a lot, and I mean a lot. And just being able to sit there and just, I think it was the sound of the needles clicking together that just really kind of was very soothing to me. But I would think great thoughts.
Right.
I never came up with something as profound as the color of vomit as being the world.
Fortunately, that died a peaceful death
Oh,
and
I'm
has
glad
never
you
been
didn't.
repeated.
And I'm kind of guessing you didn't have that one published, or
No.
you didn't submit that.
That's what my kids will find when I pass on, and they can burn it.
So you kept it. That's
Yes.
awesome. So then when was your first successful publication?
Well, you know, since I always knew that I wanted to be a writer, in college I did a little bit of writing for a newspaper. Then, after I had my kids, I took a class. It was an adult ed class, and it was in article writing.
Okay.
That's how I started. And the teacher, I kind of interviewed him. I said, "Where have you published?" So he told me where he'd published, and I took it. And before I left the class, I had published an article in a government services kind of publication on serving government employees. You know, there used to be millions, hundreds, thousands of publications that are no longer here.
Right.
And the blog has kind of taken that on. But I managed to sell something to them, and then over the years I would keep writing nonfiction or opinion pieces, a lot of those. I wrote a handbook when I worked for a library. I wrote a handbook with another employee on recruiting and managing volunteers in libraries.
Wow.
So I've written about all kinds of stuff.
So did you have a background in human resources, or you just naturally know people?
You just, you learn how to interview people who, because you're naturally curious. If you open yourself up to that, you naturally are curious about these other people, and then you ask them if you can interview them or talk to them.
Nice.
Yeah.
Wow. So that goes along still with that lifelong learning that we've been talking
Right.
about. So then what about the first book? When did your first book get published?
My first novel was published in 2012, but it was a novel that I had written. I take a long, long time to write fiction. It was a novel I had written over the period of like 10 years, and I had actually finished it, maybe 2006.
Okay.
And then with writing, then you get into the process of submitting it to publishers and agents. And I mean, you've got to have a very strong hide and a hard head so you don't get
Yeah.
too depressed about the rejections.
A hard constitution.
Yeah.
A very thick skin. Yeah. So with that first book, well, let me backtrack a little bit, because when you're talking about writing fiction, it takes a long time. Explain what your own personal experience is in writing fiction versus nonfiction, because you did so many articles in your career. I mean, you have a pretty impressive career and a fantastic resume, a lot of community service and civic work and stuff. And how do you feel? What's the process like? Is it easier to write fiction or nonfiction? Or
I think it's easier to write nonfiction, and it's certainly much more saleable than fiction. But because both types of writing deal with words, they can mutually support each other. And certainly, even if you're writing nonfiction, like mine tended to be more journalistic than, say, creative nonfiction, although I do some of that. You learn things that you can put into your fiction.
Oh,
Lots
got it.
and lots and lots. In fact, it's funny because I find stuff surfacing. I mean, if you're a Freudian psychologist, you would just go crazy and
Some of the
talking
things
to a
that pop
fiction
out.
writer. Yeah, like in the most recent book, which is called Never Retreat, the heroine works in the law office of a big energy company.
Oh, wow.
When I was just out of college, I got a job with a law firm in San Francisco. I had no training, but I had a wonderful boss. He let me learn, and I was essentially a paralegal with no training.
Wow.
And then when I wrote the book, Never Retreat, I had her doing stuff in a law office like that.
And did that just kind of pop out of nowhere, that it just
Yeah, I
kind of
needed to-
morphed into the story?
Yeah, I needed an occupation for her, and it fit in with the things that were going on in the story.
Wow, that's interesting because there's two authors that are just popping into my mind right now, two local authors, and one of them is an RN, or she's a retired nurse, and so she writes mystery, stories, and it's based a lot of, her experiences, I'm sure, as a RN. And another friend of mine who's an author, who actually she's another RN, and hers is almost like dark fantasy. And she told me one time that a lot of her personal experiences, like she had this terrible experience hiking one time by herself, and I was really concerned about her, and she says, I'm okay, and I have a great story for the next book.
Yes. A friend of mine says everything is material. So as soon as you go through anything, you think, I can use it. I had a really terrible boss once, and I kept thinking all the way through my employment there. I kept thinking, oh, this is great material. I can use this.
Well, but I'm sure that's a great coping skill, too. When you're going through something really terrible, just think it could be a great character in a book or a great story or situation in a book. Well, I have only written one book, and I do not consider myself a writer. I just wrote this book, so I guess I'm an author. But I would get into little discussions between the fiction writers and the other nonfiction writers, and we would go back and forth and back and forth. And I would say, oh, no, I think nonfiction would be so much easier to write. And the fiction writers are going, oh, no. I think, and we back and forth, and it's really funny. So I guess it's just wherever you fall into place.
Well, the main difference that I have found is that nonfiction, at least for me, is so much more objective. You can look at it, you can evaluate, do I have all the facts? Does it make sense? Am I saying it correctly? Whereas fiction is a lot more amorphous, and you have to kind of pull things out of your subconscious, and there's a lot more disagreement in readers about what is good about fiction and what is not so good about fiction.
Well, but it really gives you the opportunity to tap into your imagination even more when you're doing fiction writing. And that's
Right.
kind of my guess. I wouldn't know because I've never done anything like that, and I probably won't. But so the other thing I did want to ask you is, you sent me an article that you had written. I'm not even sure when you wrote it, but it's a delightful article, and it's titled How I Roll. And it's about exercise and writing. And why do you think that exercise for you is so important in the writing process? And how did you put the two together? Because other people who are just listening to this podcast might be scratching their heads going, well, no, that's not how you write. You sit down at a computer and you just can't keep pounding away at the keys.
Well, I actually found it out by doing it. I was in a spinning class, and I was thinking about a plot that I was working on, and a plot point that wasn't making any sense. And I just started spinning and spinning and spinning, and then these ideas kind of popped into my head. So you can't, or I can't, use it for an editing process, but in terms of feeding me ideas, it's great. And then I also found the same thing happening when I took walks. And I wrote an article for the Christian Science Monitor called, I forget what it was called, something about taking a walk. And I found the same thing happening. Now, walking isn't necessarily as vigorous as spinning, but I found that being outside and being, around nature and stuff, I kind of let my head relax, and then ideas would pour in. So I think there is just definitely some sort of correlation between exercise of certain types and creativity. Now, I've talked to people who say when they meditate, the same kind of thing happens. I haven't tried really ongoing meditation, but I can see how that would happen because you kind of let your own sensor down and you just let the feelings and the ideas come through.
Well, and you let the clutter go.
Yes.
And I think it's that chatter in our brain that keeps on going that we listen to even though we don't want to, and it's so hard to turn off. So with something like meditation or going for a walk outside or, in the hiking in the mountains, and I think that might even be there seems to be an extraordinary amount of authors in Colorado. And, a lot of us are independently published. I think that's part of the reason is that we live in such an amazing place. It's so beautiful, and just being able to get out in nature as often as we can, and we're exposed to the majestic mountains. But for those of you who don't live here and are thinking about moving here, it's just too crowded.
We don't want you. No way. But I visited New York and I could feel the same kind of thing happening because I hadn't been any length of time in New York, and it was almost distracting, but there was always something different to look at and stuff that I can think, oh, that's just like a person in Denver, or, oh, this is much dirtier than Denver, or, oh, this is much more interesting than Denver. So I think it probably has a lot to do with opening your mind up to things, being curious about them. And I love your emphasis on curiosity. Years ago, a friend of mine who was very, very creative took an informal poll of her friends, and she said, what is the defining characteristic you think of yourself that keeps you going? And I thought and thought and thought, and I decided it's curiosity. And a lot of her friends said that. And I think that's Channel 6's motto, isn't it? Stay curious. Because if you're curious about it, well, one would hope that you would also start to come up with solutions, but
one would hope.
That could be the depressing part. But as long as you're curious, you're out there thinking, evaluating, experiencing, valuing.
Well, and I think that sense of interest and curiosity, if you keep that spirit, then it takes the judgment away, because it's like, well, that is interesting, and why is this so? And you start to explore things in a different way, and you look at them in a different way, and it also really helps grow your awareness.
Yes.
Not only your awareness of other people, environmental awareness of yourself, and I think it's just one of those things that really helps keep us vibrant and healthy and youthful during the entire course of our lifetime.
And one would hope open to other people's needs and perspectives.
Exactly. I have to giggle at that because I had a ballet master that I absolutely adored. As a matter of fact, I dedicated my book to him, and he always used to say, "Hope springs eternal."
Yes.
He was a delightful man when he was in a good mood. So there was...
Well, I have a 7-year-old grandson, and he's so funny. He has started doing, he calls them experiments. So and they always seem to involve water. I don't know why. But he'll be out there with like a toilet paper roll, stuffing it with sand and then pouring water out over it. I never can understand what he's doing, but it's an experiment and he's trying to learn.
That's right. Well, and when you think about it, that's how we did learn, even when, our entire lifetime when we were babies, even how to move. Nobody taught us how to roll over, put one hand here, do this, push here. We learned on our own, and just by exploring our environment and just kind of playing and seeing what works and what didn't. And that's that sense of play and interest and curiosity carried us through, in childhood until we got to a certain point where we were told to, okay, now sit down and shut up, and we're going to tell you, how you're going to move and how you're going to play and how you're going to do everything. And there went that sense of interest and curiosity and playfulness. So,
well, another interesting point, because I've done some informal kind of study and research on children's literacy. Children have to experience physicality in order to learn. So, there have been movements that say, no, kids going to recess is a waste of time.
Oh.
No, it's not. They need that. They need to play. They need to interact. They need to touch. They need to try things.
Well, and even you feel that same way too when you're exercising. I mean, even on the, I don't spin, but I know what it is. But even just the sense of being in a group of people, having that social interaction, having that physical touch and playing on the bike and just listening to the instructions, it goes back to that sense of playfulness and being on the playground and stuff. And that's
Right.
why, of course, then the creative sense. And I think, of course, a lot of it has to do with the feel-good hormones that are released and the blood flow to the
Yep.
brain and all that stuff. But it's just, you can't separate the mind-body connection or the cognitive with the physical. I mean, it's just so much a part of us.
And do you get curious about after death? How will we still feel stuff? I'm so curious. I mean, I'm sure people look at me and think, oh, well, she's just a little old lady. But I'm still curious about that next huge passage. And I hope that I will still be able to experience things and learn things. And I think, oh, well, maybe I'll get to meet Jane Austen, or maybe I'll
how
get to
fun.
meet
Yeah.
Freud. Yeah.
See, that's kind of my belief system, is that's what I feel like there is even after we depart this earth. And I think there's still so much more that we are going to be able to do and to be able to experience, and even to be able to influence the people who are still on earth. But that's if I'm a little crazy, it's just, that's
We can only hope.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, my kids never listen to me now. What makes me think they'll listen to me then? I don't know.
Well, it's really funny. Even, when my parents passed away in 2010, and they died 19 days apart, and they were both ill with the same, it was leukemia. And I mean, it was just that whole year of 2010 was kind of like a game of end stage leukemia poker, and everything was just falling apart. And of course, they're in Pennsylvania, so I was flying back and forth from Denver to Pennsylvania to help them out. Oh, to visit. We didn't call it helping because they wouldn't accept that. I come from a very stubborn breed, and my two older sisters and I, the three of us, we get our schedule, so we would always be going back and forth. And it was really funny because even after they passed, and my mom died first, and then I stayed with my dad to help him, and then he sent me home, and I'm like, well, I'm going to be back here in a few days, and I was. But before I came back after he died, they were at the house, two of my sisters, the oldest and the youngest, and they were doing laundry. And they're trying to get stuff done, and my baby sister put stuff in the dryer and turned it on and said, okay, come on, let's go, we have errands to run. And my oldest sister says, no, we can't do that, Mommy never left the dryer on, she never left the house.
It sounds like my husband.
And my other sister says, well, she's not here, is she? And the dryer, boom, stopped.
Oh, no, she showed you.
Yes, she
Never
did.
disregard what your mother tells you to do.
So the two of them looked at each other like, oh my God. And Alyssa said it was just a fluke. She turned the dryer back on, turned to walk out, and it stopped again. And they looked at each other and said, let's get out of here, because I know my mother was still there. And she did the same thing. She kind of threw a water bottle at my head after I'd come back from Denver, because I was talking to one of my clients about something, and I guess I was saying something that Mother would not have approved of, and I had my water bottle in a spot that I always had it, and it just went boom, flying across the room.
Wow.
Yeah. Like I said, I come from a very powerful and almost frightening tribe.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there is plenty out there.
What is your ethnic background?
Slovak. My father was born in Czechoslovakia, and he came to the United States. Actually, he immigrated twice. There's a long story in that. But he actually came the second time when he was 12 years old in 1939. So, things
Glad
were...
he got out of there then.
Exactly. And my mother was born here in the United States, but her parents were from Yugoslavia. So, I was raised with that ethnic background, that ethnicity of being both, Serbian and Slovak, which were, of course, very closely related. And as a matter of fact, I will be leaving town this week to go back to Pittsburgh to celebrate Orthodox Christmas, which is January 7th.
Oh.
As well as my oldest sister's birthday, which is something she never lets us live down. All these 66 years later, I was born on Dito's birthday or Christmas. Okay, whatever. And my Aunt Stella is turning 90 years old.
Wow.
So we're going to be celebrating her 90th birthday.
And is she still real active, or is she kind of declining?
She doesn't spin. But she does still bowl. She bowls at least
Wow.
3, 4 days a week. I have some video clips of her bowling strikes and stuff recently. And it was 8 years ago. She was, at the age of 82, she was honored for being the top female senior bowler in the state of Pennsylvania.
Well, great.
So think about that. Pennsylvania is a big state, and there
Yeah.
are a lot of bowlers, and there's a lot of seniors. So I actually flew back to Pennsylvania to go to her bowling banquet to celebrate Aunt Stella's, achievement. Because I mean, we all want to be Aunt Stella someday. She's just an
Yes.
amazing person, and she will be doing the Christmas dinner, of course, on January 7th, and all of the cooking is made by scratch. I mean, she does everything from scratch. My oldest niece, after she was born, she was in the grocery store with my sister, and she said to my sister, "Mommy, I want to go to the scratch department." And my sister's like, "Scratch department? What's the scratch department?" And she says, "Well, the place where Aunt Stella gets everything."
She makes it by scratch.
From scratch. So yeah, she's an amazing person. So speaking of cooking, you have a little bit of a background in that, which I thought was really very
Yeah.
entertaining.
Well, I don't consider myself terribly gifted at anything, really, but in terms of cooking, we were so poor for so long that I used to compulsively enter cooking contests.
Okay.
And because I have kind of a marketing outlook in everything I do, I applied it to cooking. So I was in the Pillsbury Bake Off once, and there used to be a national chicken cooking contest, and I was in that twice.
Wow.
But I stopped entering when they started having people vote, because I just wanted to be judged by food editors, not by the
Right.
public at large.
So when was this? Were you married at the time?
Oh,
or
it was long,
before?
long ago, but my daughter and son were born, so it was after 1971 for the Bake Off. And the other two were, I think, in the 70s.
Okay. Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, there's still some sort of correlation, though, of making order out of chaos. When I look at
Yes.
something like cooking, you've got this kitchen, you've got your ingredients, and you're putting it together, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So it's a lot like writing.
Well, it is, and it is creative, and this is another way that it's so strange to me how ideas come to me and to other people, because in this newest book, Never Retreat, the heroine is the mother of a teenage boy, and in one scene she's making dinner, she's making chili, and she's thinking, let's see, to make this more nutritious, I need to add carrots and green beans to my chili. So this comes out, I mean, this is me, this is what I do, and then the character did it too. So little bits of your own personality or things you've seen other people do percolate into your writing. It's so wild.
Well, how could it not? I mean, because every experience we have is placed, what I like to say, in the vault, in
Yeah.
our brain somewhere deep in the recesses of it, even with the one that you wrote when you were a teenager in your dark days. I just think that is just so funny. But, and it's the same thing even with knitting. I used to love that because I'd have all these just balls of yarn. And from that, I could create something that I could wear that was beautiful. And
Yeah.
I did make some beautiful sweaters. It was during my time of anxiety and stress, and knitting really calmed me down. So I was knitting so much and making so many sweaters, I had to give them away because I couldn't wear them all. But it was pretty funny. So.
I've tried knitting, but my husband always drags out the story about when Bonnie was going to knit a blanket for our first baby in 1969, and it's still in patches. It's probably got, moth-eaten now.
Oh, that's funny.
But I don't have the patience, and my sister knits, and she also quilts. And I think both of those are very creative, but I go, oh my God, I'd go nuts trying to quilt with all those thousands of little stitches.
Yeah, I couldn't do that. The thing I really liked about knitting, and I haven't picked up my needles in a long time, I really need to someday or get back on it, because it really is fun, is that it moves so fast. And people say, no, it doesn't. Knitting doesn't move fast. But yeah, it really does. Compared to like needlepoint, that would drive me absolutely nuts.
Yeah.
Either needlepoint or the quilting with those tiny stitches. But you can get big needles, fat yarn, and bada boom, you got something in just by the end of the day, you got something you could wear. So,
And if you're raising children or working on a marriage,
yeah.
that is very slow.
Yeah.
A relationship is very slow to build.
And a lot of work too,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
How long have you been married?
I'm almost embarrassed to tell you. 52 years.
Oh, congratulations. That's
we
wonderful.
beat my in-laws.
Wow. That's amazing. And your husband, it appears that he's very supportive of your writing career.
Right.
Because I saw him at Georgetown with you.
As long as I do my share of chores. And this is interesting too because, he really has been supportive. When we had 2 little babies, he was working full-time and going to school, and I was taking care of the babies. And he said to me, "You are putting in more hours a week than I am. So I'm going to give you a day off a week and take care of the house."
Bless his heart.
So we have always, there were 5 years when I stayed at home with the kids and he worked, and then I went to work and he stayed at home with the kids. But in those days, people think this is such a modern thing, but this was in the 70s. Mm-hmm. People used to say, "Well, does he have an alcohol problem?"
Oh, dear.
I'm glad you're letting him be creative. It was just so misunderstood what we were trying to do,
Yeah.
and we still do it. Even now, we split the housework down the middle.
Well, there you go. That's why you've been married for 52
Right.
years and still going strong. Okay, so let's all write that down. That's pretty important. Anyway, getting back to there was one quote that you said in that article that I just wanted to share with everybody because I thought it was just so poignant and so, just really kind of struck a chord with me. And you said that mental activity, I have found, is a natural result of physical activity, given the right conditions and mindset.
Yes. Yeah, but don't try it when you're driving in heavy traffic. That's a good thing about spinning. You're just staying in one spot.
Well, maybe the mental activity when you are driving in heavy traffic is a really good thing to start paying attention to the road because
Yes.
it drives me crazy to see how many people are just, they pull out their cell phones and how could you drive when you're looking down at this little 4 by 6 inch square bit of...
Well, you can't drive safely.
No, you can't. So, but in the end, if all of this wonderful discussion that we've been having and with your many interests, which I think are just fascinating, your one true passion is...
Fiction writing.
And you have, how many books out? How many fiction?
Well, I have 2 novellas and 3 novels. They're all, one I self-published, the other 4 are with very small publishers. Mm-hmm. I still haven't figured out how to write or how to get the attention of big publishing companies. But I have met the goal of trying to publish novels, so that's satisfying.
Let me say this, that if you do figure out how to get the attention of the big publishing companies, you're going to be a very popular lady.
Well, good. I can go around and lecture people on what to do.
Exactly. Because I think there's a lot of people, especially, like I said, in Colorado, there are so many authors. I was really surprised.
Yes, and when we were up in Georgetown, all those people were fascinating. I spent more time talking to the other authors.
That's what I really like about doing those events is just getting to meet other authors. There was the one lady right next to me who, I think she did her first book right after she was married and having kids, just as a creative outlet, but didn't publish until 20 years later. And she just had a fascinating story. And I think that every single one of us have a story, more than one story. And if we can share our stories with each other and just get them out there into the world, I just think the world would be a much more interesting place. And probably, I would hope, maybe a kinder place too. It's just everybody has their story to tell. And if we can get our stories out, we can really understand each other a little bit better. So I think that that's really an important piece too.
Well, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
About telling our stories and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
See, I knew I could get it back.
A lot of my background has been in public relations and marketing for nonprofits.
That's right.
And in marketing, they have a saying, marketing is telling stories. It doesn't have to do with statistics or scientific facts. It has to do with telling stories. And if you look at ads, that's all they are. Stories about people and why your life will be better if you buy this.
Well, that's really interesting because I was just talking to another lady. I interviewed her. She's a branding photographer. And she basically said the same thing, that branding is about telling your story, your personal story, having people learn your personality or get to know you a little bit better. And I think sometimes we lose track of that, and we're so distracted by trying to wow them or come up with the latest thing, or trying to come up with something that's going to get their attention that really isn't our genuine self, or we're not being authentic.
Yes.
And people can see through that, I think.
Well, maybe you're more optimistic than I am. I don't think they always see through it. But
Well,
that's
that's
all
true.
right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a cynic and a cockeyed optimist.
That's what's a wonderful combination, and it really does work for you. It does seem to work for you. So that's great. So tell us a little bit more about what I would really like to know right now is how people can find you.
Oh, well, I have a website, which is just BonnieMcCune.com.
Okay.
And then the blog is part of the website. And then I have a Facebook, and I think it's author Bonnie McCune. And McCune, since my husband's relatives were immigrants, we have no idea what their original name was.
Okay.
But the way we spell it is not real common in Ireland itself, but it's McCune
Okay.
and BONNIE.
Okay. So your website then is just BonnieMcCune.com.
.com.
And what's the name of your blog?
If you just put BonnieMcCune.com/blog, you'll get
Yeah.
to it. But I call it Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, because I really think that everybody is an individual and they just have fascinating things that they do and they're interested in, and challenges to meet. I mean, I don't think that glamorous movie stars in gold lame gowns should be the ones that are honored. I've known people when I worked who had to face extreme difficulties, and they were able to face them and build a satisfying life for themselves and help other people. And that, to me, is what defines a successful life. If you have something you do and you are trying to help other people as well as yourself, then you're successful.
And that's why that's why I asked about the blog, because I knew it had an interesting title, but I couldn't remember it at the time, so that's why I asked you. And that goes back to everybody has a story.
Right.
And everybody needs to tell their story and share their story. And it's really interesting. There's people I've met who, I have never done anything interesting, or I haven't done this. And then when you really start talking to them and you start peeling back some of the layers, it's like they are fascinating. But they don't think that their story is that interesting because they've lived it. And it's like, well, it's no big deal. I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro when I was 50 for my birthday. And it's like, well, that's pretty interesting, stuff like that.
We had a neighbor years ago who collected buttons, if you can imagine.
Oh, dear.
And when I heard that, I thought, oh my God, she's got to be nuts. Then I went over one day and I saw her button collection. It was so fascinating. And there is a Colorado Button Collectors Association, and they have an annual event, and you can go, and buttons tell the history of the state and the individuals in it, because they have, they might collect buttons that have to do with camping, or buttons that are all made out of glass. It was so neat.
That is fascinating. And they still have this Colorado
Yeah, as
button?
far as I know, yeah, because I ran into it a couple years ago, too.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to look that
Yeah.
up, because that just sounds just really interesting. And to go to each state has their own.
I think so.
Wow.
Well, maybe not every state, but a lot of states do.
Well, that would be something to look into. So, okay, well, thank you so much for being here today,
It's
Bonnie.
been fun.
Is there anything you would like to leave our listeners with? Any bit of advice, any words of wisdom? If they wanted to get started writing, how would you suggest that they do it? Have a sense of humor?
Don't. I mean, it's just like everything else. You've got to get satisfaction from the activity itself. So jump in and start. But people are certainly welcome to contact me via email, and I'm in touch with a lot of different writer organizations
Okay.
in Colorado.
Okay.
And I'm always happy to go out and talk to groups and talk to people
Excellent.
about
Okay,
writing.
that's really good to know and really important because I know there are a lot of people out there that would like to write a book or
Right.
would like to write their story, and it doesn't have to be like the next great novel, but just even something simple to leave to their children, or life stories, just whatever. So I think that's really important. So if anybody does want to get a hold of Bonnie and maybe have her come and speak to a group or whatever, give you some advice on writing, just go to her website and they can contact
Right.
you through the website. So okay, BonnieMcCune.com. And okay, I think that anything else you'd want to tell them?
No, keep on exercising.
That's okay. Now I got a little tear in the corner of my eyes when I hear that, and because you just got to keep moving.
You do have to keep moving. And I know I can't do what I did when I was in my 30s or 40s, but we keep moving.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been lucky because my husband is, if I get up and I think, oh, I don't want to go, he says, come on, let's go. So having two people that help each other is real good.
Well, I think that's important too, that you have to have a partner.
Yeah.
And even if it's just a neighbor or a friend or even just by phone, somebody to kind of be accountable to.
Right.
And to say, you got to do it, come on, cheer each other on and just kind of motivate each other. So that's a really important part of it too. So.
Well, another thing that works is bagels. I had two neighbors I used to talk with, and then we'd always go and have bagels.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Bonnie, thank you so much for being with us today.
This was fun.
It really was fun. It was great having you, and I really appreciate it since I know you're just feeling a little bit under the weather, but you did a great job. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for hosting this.
You betcha. And thank you all once again so much for listening. I really appreciate you. And remember to keep that sense of interest and curiosity, lifelong learning, because that is the way of the FemiNinja. So until next time, bye now. And that's a wrap on another episode of the FemiNinja Project. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, be safe, be strong, and until next time, bye now.